I'm Retta Lewis, and we're here at the Angola Middle School getting ready for former President Bill Clinton to take the stage and have a speech about his wife Hillary. The mood is very exciting, and whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it's sure neat to be a part of this. As Trent and I drove up today, there was a line wrapping around the building for people waiting to get in to the gymnasium. They do have an overflow gymnasium that people are going to be able to be in there and hear the speech, not necessarily see the speech. So you have a bird's eye view with Channel 20.
Good morning, Angola. I'm Angola City Councilman Dave Olson, and I would like to welcome all of you to this rally for Senator Hillary Clinton. The Mayor of Angola, Dick Hickman, is unable to be here today and sends his regards. This is a great day for local Democrats. This is a great day for Hoosiers in Northeast Indiana. And it is a historical day for the city of Angola because never has a former president ever been to our city. This is a day for us all to celebrate American democracy at its finest. For in the United States, we elect our leaders and determine our nation's future. So here today we gather, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, adults, and students, all of us here to listen to comments from one of our former leaders, a former president, a man who knows what it takes to lead this great country of ours. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to welcome and introduce to you the former President of the United States, Mr. Bill Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Good morning, Angola. I want to thank Dave Olson. I'd like to thank some others who are here. Eugene Kennedy, our county party chair, Kathy Armstrong, the city council person, Brent Moore, the treasurer of the Democratic Party. I'd like to thank all the staff, the principal, the teachers, and the students of the middle school for letting us come here. I'd like to thank Joe and Joni Champion and their families that met me outside, and two of Hillary's great supporters, the former Speaker of the Indiana House, John Gregg, and Hillary's co-chair, Joe Hogsett, your former Secretary of State. And I want to thank one person who's not here, who has really been on the front lines for Hillary in this campaign, your Senator Evan Bayh, who's done a great, great job for her. Folks, Aren't you glad Indiana's going to help pick the next president? And aren't you glad your vote's going to count? Don't you think you ought to sit down if you can? Otherwise, I'll get carried. You'll have me thinking I've gotten a constant standing ovation. And this country has some very serious problems. We all know that. But it's always a mistake to bet against America. We keep coming back. And yet, today we learned that for the fourth month in a row, America has lost jobs. After producing 22.7 million jobs in the 1990s, when you gave me the honor of serving, our economy has only produced 5 million jobs in this entire decade. That's why incomes are in the fix they're in. Incomes after inflation, average income rose $7,500 a year when I was in office. Now in America, it's $1,000 lower than it was the day I left office after inflation. And in Indiana, because you have lost a disproportionate number of manufacturing jobs, income is $2,400 a year lower after inflation. Healthcare costs have doubled, college costs up 75%, energy costs up $2,000. This year, the average car will take $450 more to run. The average family will spend $250 to $300 more on food because of energy costs. The middle class is genuinely under assault. And 5 million people have fallen from the middle class into poverty while they were working. In the 90s, we had almost 8 million people work their way from poverty into the middle class. So you have to have a president who will restore the middle class and reclaim the future for the young people here. And Hillary does not think this is a really complicated issue. We just have been operating on the wrong vision for America. America works best when it looks like this crowd, when we're united across age and gender and race and religion and everything else, and we're all in this together, and we're a country of shared prosperity based on shared opportunities and shared responsibilities. That is her simple goal. We'll do fine in the 21st century if we have the right goal. But if we think we can go on in an economy where 90% of the benefits went to the top 10% of the people and 43% went to the top 1%, a big chunk of that to the top 0.1%, if we think we can do well in an interdependent world, in a global economy, we're wrong. And everybody knows that. That's why we got to change our country. I came here to ask you to help make her president because I think she is the best candidate for this moment I've ever had a chance to support. And I'll tell you, my daughter got me in trouble the other day in Indiana. They asked her at a rally if she thought her mother would be a better president than her father. And she said, well, of course I do. So I talked to Chelsea that night, and I thought she'd say something like, oh, chill out, Dad. You know, she's on the ballot. You're not. You can't run for anything anymore. What else do you want me to say? What she said was, Dad, they asked me a direct question. I had to give an honest answer. And what I want to say to you is, for this moment in history, I agree with her. I agree with her. And I want to explain why. And I would be here on her behalf if asked if we had never been married and I knew her as I do, because I have never met anybody in my life that was a more gifted or dependable change maker, someone who could make changes in other people's lives. And as you go to the polls, you have to think about who can turn the speeches into solutions, who can turn the promises into progress, who can make a difference in the lives of ordinary Americans. And I think it's very interesting. You don't have to take my word for this. I mean, just in Arkansas, where she has not lived in 15 years, and where her detractors tried to say, well, what has she got to do with us? She's a senator from New York. She got 70% of the vote in the Democratic primary, across all racial and income and regional lines in that state. And 65 to 85 people from that little state, some of whom could not afford to do so, have gone all over America asking people to vote for her. They may have turned around New Hampshire, and they had their own little brochure they wrote that said, Look at the changes this woman made in our lives. You need a president who can make changes. Look at the people in rural areas that got health care. Look at the people who got preschool programs that didn't have it. When she ran our education program, we were ruled one of the 2 most improved school systems in America. She raised the money herself to create America's first rural development bank to give loans to men and women that lost factory and farm jobs when nobody else would give them credit, and they could start again. That bank is still a roaring success. In the latest poll in Arkansas, which has only voted 3 times for Democrats since 1964, and twice was for me. I was their governor. They pretty well had to do that. And they voted once for President Carter and then for President Reagan. They pretty much voted with the country. Senator McCain was 16 points ahead of her opponent, which is a predictable result for the state. But she was 15 points ahead of John McCain in Arkansas because they know her. They know she's a change maker. They know she can make a difference in people's lives. In New York, you might be surprised to know this, but New York's a lot more like Indiana than you think. It's a big Democratic state in presidential elections years because of New York City, Buffalo, some of our other cities, and the big suburban counties. But 40 of our 62 counties voted to re-elect President Bush. 2 years later, Hillary ran for office. In those 40 counties, she got 60% of the vote. And there are farmers from those counties going all over America saying, you ought to vote for this woman because she is the only person who ever actually did anything to change our lives for the better, to give us a way to be more productive on our farms, to find new markets for our products, to lower our energy costs. I mean, it is amazing. You got to pick a commander-in-chief, someone who can bring the troops home from Iraq, rebuild a badly strained military, continue to combat the Al-Qaeda there and especially in Afghanistan where the whole world is with us, and take care of our veterans. Isn't it interesting that the first serious woman candidate for president has the support of 2 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and 35 retired generals and admirals, all of whom believe the time has come to start bringing our troops home. Because we've been there longer than we were in World War II. We've lost 4,000 lives. We have 70,000 people wounded. We've used the Army, the Marine Corps, the National Guard, and the reserves. It is so bad that for a year we've been training Navy reservists in Army infantry tactics and deploying them to Iraq. So they know we have to do this, but they want to do it in the right way. She wants to leave a small number of special forces there to combat the Al-Qaeda because they want a third war in the Middle East, and they want to stop the next president from doing the single thing that would most lift the cloud of terror from the young people's future. Have the president make a just and lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians that guarantees security for the Israelis and a homeland for the Palestinians. They want to stop that. They want this done right, these military leaders do. And they want somebody to understand that mental health problems are going up exponentially among our young men and women in uniform when they're required to do the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th tour. I read about a man who lost his life today, who had a family in Afghanistan on his 7th tour of duty. 7th. So you need somebody that has the confidence of these military leaders to get people to enlist, to re-enlist, to rebuild. Hillary wants to go back to an America where we cooperate with other countries for a change and act alone only when we have to, where we have diplomacy with friend and foe alike and use military force only as a last resort. But you can only do that if you have a credible military. If people believe that we have the finest military in the world, we have almost broken it, and it has to be rebuilt. And we also have to take care of veterans. We have 70,000 wounded veterans, over 2,000 with traumatic brain injuries. And she is determined that we will not make the mistake we made after Vietnam and confuse an unpopular war with our moral obligation to the men and women who have served in it. We owe them a lot, and we have to take care of them. And you know, I don't expect a lot of young people will vote on this issue unless they have a family member in the military. But I'm telling you the young people in this audience will pay the heaviest price if we fail. I know. There are 200,000 homeless veterans in America today. Almost all of them are my contemporaries. They're Vietnam vets who had their generation's version of what you call post-traumatic stress disorder today. And if they had had the GI Bill for the 21st century that Hillary proposes, if they had come home with all their problems to serious counseling, mental health care, a veteran's home to live in if they couldn't live on their own, and not just a GI education bill, but a bill that would give them small business loans and housing loans and rent supplements, and if they got in trouble, as many of them do, for years afterward and fell out of their rental housing, somebody go pick them up and give them a chance to start again, we wouldn't have those people sleeping under bridges and in cardboard boxes. She will never let that happen again. And that's important. And these generals are not like some of the people who are against her. They've never said a bad word about her opponent. They're just for her. They're for her because of her service on the Armed Services Committee, because she's passed bill after bill after bill, always with a Republican co-sponsor, to try to make sure national security is beyond partisan politics. A bill to get body armor to our troops quicker. A bill to protect the bonuses of wounded soldiers who couldn't do their 4-year stint. A bill to guarantee that members of the National Guard and Reserves, when they come home, now have the same health benefits for life that regular military personnel do. That's a big deal in Indiana. You've given more National Guardsmen per capita to this effort than any other state in America. I could go on and on. And she was the only U.S. senator picked by the Pentagon to be on a small commission to modernize the military for the 21st century, and they asked her to serve when the Republicans were in the majority. Why? Because they trusted her with the future of the men and women in uniform. They knew she knew more, they knew she cared more, they knew she'd done more. You need someone like that to be commander-in-chief to get this war in Iraq over and to continue to do what's right by America's security. She is by far your best choice on this. And I hope you will support her for that. Now, I believe she's your best choice on the economy too, for 2 reasons. One is she gets you. You know, she is basically a product of a middle-class upbringing, and she went through all the struggles we had in Arkansas in the 1980s, and she has worked very hard in the distressed areas of New York. She understands grassroots middle-class economics, and she has the advantage of being from New York at a time when our whole economy is threatened by this home mortgage meltdown, and you have to understand finance to figure out what to do about it. And you should care about that. Indiana is the 10th most affected state by home mortgage foreclosures. So my case for her is simple. Number one, we are not going to get incomes up until we get jobs back in this economy. You cannot have a country this big that doesn't produce any jobs. There's no demand for labor. You can't raise the wages. And she has a plan that will do 2 things you need. First, it will create 8 million jobs that can't be outsourced. And second, it will bring manufacturing back to the United States. And this is very important. Let me deal with each of them. Number one, she proposes to create 3 million jobs by putting people to work on work that needs doing today, repairing our roads, our bridges, our water systems, our sewer systems, our rail lines. All of this will make our energy use more efficient, and it will create jobs that can't be outsourced. Number two, she proposes to create a strategic energy fund By repealing the outrageous subsidies given to the big oil companies and others in 2005, never should have been given, and creating a fund to finance the only strategy that's working for other wealthy countries, which is to make America more energy independent with homegrown clean energy and energy efficiency projects that will create jobs in every single community in the United States. I'll just give you an example. Under her fund, every state would receive some money to make every school building, every university building, every state and local government building, every hospital, eventually all the homes in this country more energy efficient. None of those jobs can be outsourced. You got to be where the buildings are. Now, I do this work all around the world with my foundation. I have a partnership with universities here. You've got one here in this community you're proud of. I drove past it. It's really beautiful. And I was glad to do it. But, you know, and this will fight global warming and put people to work. And you can pay for all this work. 98% of it or more can be paid for solely with reduced electric bills. After you pay the cost of repairs off, the school has lower utility bills. You've trained a lot of people and put them to work. You've fought global warming. You've given the utility back clean power. And believe me, every school district in this country needs all the money it can get its hands on because of No Child Left Behind. So we need to do this. We can bring manufacturing back to America, but you have to have a strategy. Hillary's the co-chairman of the bipartisan Senate Manufacturing Caucus. She wants to repeal the tax provisions that encourage companies to move overseas and put tax provisions in that encourage people to reinvest in American jobs right here that will put our people to work. And she thinks we should begin by strongly supporting Senator Evan Bayh's leadership to keep our defense-related manufacturing jobs in America. We should not be outsourcing our national security. Now, the candidates have had a lot of interesting things to say about trade, and they're right. We do have to keep trading. We're 4% of the world's people with 22% of the world's income. We've got to sell something to somebody. But the rules don't work in a way that operates fairly for us. There need to be environmental and labor standards in all our trade agreements. Hillary's proposed some changes to NAFTA. She wants the trade enforcement officer that has to make a public report every single month about the state of America's trade relations and what is being done. She made a lot of other proposals. But the real reason you should support her on this issue is she has told you the whole story, which is that no trade agreement is worth the paper it's written on if it cannot be enforced. You all agree with that? You wouldn't, I mean, and trade enforcement is only 1/5 what it was when I was president. I'm going to say it again. We brought 5 times as many actions per year as they do. Now, the reason is the deficit. And no one has told you this as nearly as I can determine but her and her surrogates. And here's why. You know who we have the trade deficits with: China, Japan, Korea, and the oil sellers in order every month. And you know they abandoned the balanced budgets and surpluses I gave you and went back to trickle-down economics. If they hadn't, we'd be out of debt in 7 years and nobody would have asked a question in any of these debates about Social Security. We'd be fine. But they did. Okay, so we've added $4 trillion to the national debt and put a $30,000 birth tax on every child born in Indiana this year. And now we have to borrow money every day, right, to pay for the soldiers, to pay for the education, the health care, the subsidies, and the millionaires' tax breaks and all of that stuff. Guess who loans us money every day in order? You couldn't make this up. China, Japan, Korea, and the oil sellers. Now do you see why we can't enforce our trade laws? For the very same reason that you have no intention Monday morning of getting up, having your breakfast, moseying down to the local bank, and slapping the living daylights out of the bank president. Because if you did, you probably couldn't get a loan for a while. Now, I want you to laugh, but I also want you to think about it. This was a big mistake. This was a big mistake. It was nothing more than selfishness thinly disguised as an economic theory. It's not consistent with her view that we're all in this together and we have to build a country of shared prosperity again. So if you go to her website at hillaryclinton.com, you can find out how every last dollar that I will talk about today is accounted for, because she will take this country back to the balanced budget to give the young people here their future back and our country its economic sovereignty back. So, the next reason you ought to vote for her is that she has really offered a short and a long-term solution to the gas crisis. And she knew quite well when she said there should be short-term relief that she would be ridiculed by people who said, oh, you're pandering to the voters. Well, and a lot of the people that have ridiculed her are people I work with, because I work against global warming in America and all over the world, proving you can create jobs to do it. The problem is not one of those people writing those articles is having to choose every day between filling up a gas tank to go to work and putting food on the table or buying medicine for their family. They're not having to make these decisions. Yes, the long-term answer is to use less oil to get around, and I'll talk about that. Absolutely it is. But the long-term answer is not available to most Americans. They can't just go turn in their car like that, and they sure can't sell their house in this market and move closer to their job. It's just not an option. So she says people are really having a tough time. Here's my proposal for the short run. First, divert some of the oil that's going into our strategic petroleum reserve, send it to the refineries, increase the supply. That'll lower the price of gasoline. And I can tell you, the president's responsible for this strategic petroleum reserve. So I've run it, I know. It's 97% full. It can handle any conceivable emergency. This is a responsible thing to do when the country's in the tide it's in. And it will give people some relief. Second, on top of that, relieve people till the end of the summer of the 18.5-cent federal gasoline tax, and have the oil companies that are making record profits, they don't know what to do with the money, pay a small fee to kick into the fund to make up the difference in the money so the American people can split their profits and have a little bit of relief. And you know, you could get the price of gasoline down for several months, 30, 40 cents a gallon. And that would make a real difference to working people. And she thinks there ought to be an investigation into whether the oil companies have used the rising price of oil to charge more than they legally can for gasoline. There's a chance that's happened, and we've got to look into it. Now, but she's also been very straight with the American people in saying nobody can promise to lower the price of oil again, because the fundamental fact is there's a limited amount of oil in the ground, a limited speed at which you can get it up and put it into a refinery, and there are more and more people all around the world that can afford to buy oil. They're getting wealthier, and you can't ask them to stay poor, and so they're bidding for the price of oil. So if anybody comes here and says, vote for me, I'll lower the price of oil, you probably ought to vote against them. But what we can do quickly is to get around using less oil. And then your gas bill will go down, even if the gas price doesn't. The first thing we have to recognize, there was a story in the paper yesterday about Americans rushing to buy high-mileage vehicles. The first two were made in other countries. There was one Ford model that people were buying in pretty good numbers. And I have to defend the automakers here, because they've tried in the past to give us high-mileage vehicles when gas was high. We'd buy them for 3 or 4 months, and then we'd go back to the SUVs and the Humvees. Meanwhile, they take the pipe, because it cost a fortune to retool those automobile lines. So what Hillary says is this time the price is not going down again, but we should help them to quickly retool. She proposes to invest with clean energy bonds, co-invest to help the auto companies bear some of the cost of a quick upscale of producing high-mileage cars made in America that will create jobs in America and make jobs available to the American people. And she proposes to spend some of this money in the fund to do research to give you a really high-mileage vehicle. 2 months ago, she called me from the campaign trail. She said, Bill, I just met a guy that swears he's driving a car that gets 100 miles a gallon. She said, I'd really like to talk about this, but I don't want to be embarrassed. You call him and find out if it's true. Because I grew up in the car business and I know about this stuff. So, and I do this work around the world. So anyway, I called this fellow. And he told me, he said, yes, I'm one of 50 Americans driving a demonstration technology, gets 100 miles a gallon in town. He said, in fact, for the last 14 months, I've gotten 105 miles in town, but I only get 70 on the highway. So he sent me the stuff on the car, and I read it and talked some more to him. We exchanged emails. Here's the deal. This car is a hybrid vehicle on steroids. You know how the hybrid cars work. They work on a battery to 25 miles an hour, then you flip over into fuel. This one has a battery pack that goes on it that gives you 40 more miles every day on pure electricity, which means that you don't have to go into fuel till you get to 40 miles an hour. Then it floats into gas. Once you do that, you're at 100 miles a gallon. And keep in mind, half the cars in this country only drive 25 miles a day, mostly in town. A lot of them, if they had this, would use no fuel. And all you have to do is plug in at night. Now, in Hillary's energy plan, she proposes a $10,000 credit if you buy one of these plug-in vehicles. And as it happens, this unit now costs $10,000. But the problem is, and the reason you need a president, is they can't make enough of them to make them commercially available quick enough to do you some good. We all know, frankly, that all electric products go down in price as you produce more of them, flat screen televisions, iPods, you know. But you got to have somebody that can figure out how to produce these, because they use a material called lithium, which is mostly still in the ground in South America. So there needs to be a dramatic effort to figure out how to use this technology in a way that millions of these things can be produced and inserted in cars. General Motors is already experimenting with it. Others are. But if you had a president that cared about this, we could get this done in a hurry. The technology's there, and she proposes a tax credit which would give you dollar for dollar the cost of it, so it'd be just like buying a regular car. Now you think what that would mean to you if you had a 100-mile-a-gallon car, to your family's budget. Think what it would mean to your country. There would be millions of people rushing to buy these cars. We'd put huge numbers of people to work in the auto industry. This technology is made in Massachusetts, not somewhere else, in America. This is an American invention. And think what it would mean for your country. We could say to those oil countries, you know, we don't care now if you charge $200 a barrel for oil, because we're going to keep our $350 billion in America, in our families' pockets, in our children's future, in the jobs of tomorrow, cleaning up the planet and gaining control of our economic destiny. That's what you need a president for, and if she's elected, she'll do it. Another reason you ought to vote for it is that nobody can bring this economy back unless we do something about health care costs. If we double health care costs again in the next 7 years, you cannot bring the economy back for ordinary middle-class Americans. You're already paying 16% of our national income for health care. None of our competitors pays more than 11. No other rich country. Which means right off the bat, we're at a $700 billion disadvantage in competing for tomorrow's jobs. That is, if you took any other country's health system, Germany, France, Japan, any other rich country, and you plopped it down in America, we'd all have health care, we'd have better outcomes, and it would cost us at least $700 billion less. And Hillary is the only person who says the principle of shared opportunities means that you have to provide health care for absolutely everybody. It is not only the morally right thing to do, it is economically essential. You cannot get control of costs unless you cover everybody. Now, this is one of the real policy disagreements in this campaign. You just have to decide whether you believe it and whether it's important to you. But let me show you. Raise your hand if you know anybody without health insurance. Look around. Look around. Now, here's what I want to say. There is a direct connection between your cost problem and the people on whose behalf you raise your hand. A direct connection. Here's why. Next time you pay a health insurance premium, think about this. It'll really make you mad, but think about it. You're contributing to $50 billion the insurance companies spend every year figuring out how not to insure you. Think of it as your uninsurance premium. I'm sorry you have a pre-existing condition. I'm sorry you have a policy that just doesn't cover what you need now, although you thought it did when you bought it. I'm sorry you do have a policy. It does cover what you need, but it's really expensive what you need. So I had to go back and review your application. You made a mistake in line 3. We're canceling you. $50 billion. If everybody was covered, you'd save all that money. It'd be illegal to try to get your medical records and deny you because you have a pre-existing condition. Secondly, 30 cents of every dollar you spend on health care, think about this, 30 cents goes to paperwork. Now, is there a business in Angola that could keep its doors open if they blew 30% of their revenues on that kind of overhead? But think about why it happens. You got hundreds of companies, they're writing thousands of policies, they all cover different things, they cover different numbers of people, and they hire people every day to keep from paying. Most of the time they know they're going to pay, but if they can hold off for 3 months, the hospitals may suffer, the doctors may suffer, but they earn interest on your premium. This is a crazy system. You're paying for this, and so is our economy. So here's Hillary's alternative. If you like what you've got, you can keep it. Nobody's going to take anything away from anybody that they like. But if you don't like it, or if you don't have it, or if you can't afford it anymore, A far better option is to allow everybody to get in to the same health plan that ensures federal employees and members of Congress and our family. Now, look, it's a great deal. It's a great deal. There are more than 200 options. Like, so if you're young and single and you have no health problems, all you have to do is have enough insurance to protect you against a car wreck or an unforeseen illness. You have little children, you can get dental health coverage. Mental health issues, you can get that. Your kids are grown, but you're not old enough for Medicare and you got a certain kind of health problem, you can get a drug supplement. It's a good plan. But you'll save the money first to $50 billion, and then we'll all be insured in huge pools, so our administrative costs will go way down. You know what the Medicare cost is? 3 cents on the dollar, not 30. So it'll go toward that. Then what you do is take some of those savings and you give them to low-income working people and to small businesses that want to help their employees so that nobody finds this unaffordable and no one is ever asked to pay more than a fixed low percentage of their income in health care. If you do that, we can get control of cost and we can improve quality. If you don't, it will never happen. We have got to quit pretending that somehow we can find some magical solution here that is different from what every one of our competitors have done. This is the only answer. You know, in any kind of business or sports or any other contest, you look at what the opposition is doing, you look at what your competitors are doing, and if they're doing something better than you do, first you try to do that as well, and then you try to do it better. This is the only area where we've just gone off crazy as if, you know, we're untouched by the laws of economics and healthcare. So if you are tired of making excuses and you want to make progress, Hillary is your only choice on this, and you ought to vote for her for president. Now, let me say a few words about education and research. You ought to vote for her because she has really made this a priority and she knows more about it than anybody else, both the research and the education. She wants to do more research in clean energy technologies, more research in manufacturing technologies. The manufacturing jobs of the 21st century are going to go to the countries not with the lowest wages, but with the best technologies and the best manufacturing processes, and know more about how to make materials from recycled things that are lighter and stronger. We need to invest in that, and we need to do a lot more health research, the stem cell, the human genome research, because we are close on Alzheimer's, we are close on Parkinson's. We have already identified the 2 genetic variations that put women at high risk of breast cancer. I think within 10 years, there will be no more mastectomies because of our ability to test people and find these tumors at sub-microscopic levels. We've got to do that. And look, an extraordinary number of the young people in this audience, everybody under 21 in this audience, you think about this. You have a very, very good chance to live to be 100 years old. Yes. And no one ever claps when I say that, but trust me, the older you get, the better that'll look. But you don't want to spend the last 25 years of your life with Alzheimer's. You don't want to spend the last 35 years of your life with Parkinson's. You don't want one of your friends whom you love dearly to drop off early because of the epidemic rise of diabetes among young people that will blind young people, lose their limbs, and take their lives early. And here's one that, as far as I can tell, she's the only person that talks about it, and she started a caucus in the Senate on it. You don't want your children to come in the world with this epidemic rise in the number of kids being born with autistic conditions that nobody knows what's causing it. We've tripled the rate of children being born with autism in the last 20 years. So we've got to do this research. And we've got to do some things in education. Hillary strongly believes that No Child Left Behind is a failure, should be scrapped, and we can do better. And she is the only person, she's the only person that's been unambiguous about this. When it came in, it had the support of everybody from the president to Senator Kennedy, right across the board. And she told me the night before she voted on it, she said, look, we're all going to have to vote for this because this is the bill with the money for the schools in it. But it's obvious that nobody that was ever in a classroom wrote this bill. I mean, and I say this to all of you because this is worth some talking about. When I say this line I just said, there's always a loud applause, but I look around the crowd and some people are silent. And I know what you're thinking, the silent. They're thinking, Oh, well, he had me till then, but I think she's just pandering to the teachers and they don't want accountability. That is not true. That is not true. The reason the teachers don't like this and the students and the parents and the principals is it doesn't work. Look, we all want, you want every child in Angola to learn at world-class levels, don't you? You know they're in a global economy. You know they need to know science and math and technology, and those that will be involved in it need to know languages. You know that. And I hope you know they can. We actually have now massive studies of the brain where you can measure the capacities of people's brains. These studies prove conclusively that almost 100% of our kids can learn anything they need to know without regard to their family income, their race, or their first language. This is not a brain power issue. We know why we're behind most other wealthy countries, from Singapore to Germany, at the 8th and 11th grade level. They start to school earlier. I mean, they go to school longer, I'm sorry. Some start school earlier, but my thing is the school year is longer. They start the hard courses earlier in their careers. They have national standards that they've worked on for decades that are high. And relative to other professions, these countries pay their teachers more, they train them harder, and they retrain them over a lifetime, constantly, always pushing the envelope. So, Hillary believes Leave No Child Behind doesn't address that. Because it says we're going to give your school district money based on how your kids do on 5 tests 5 years in a row. And then it says don't sweat it, you can pick the test and the passing score. Now, if you wanted to use a test to catch up in these areas, you would pick a very hard test with a very high score, and you'd say, this is a 10-year project. And every month before the test, you'd have an Angola Academic Excellence Month. And you'd celebrate and encourage, and you'd bring people, you'd do whatever it took. And it'd be wonderful, except you'd lose all your federal money. But if you give an easy test with a low score, you'll get your check all right. But the students and teachers will hate it because they spend all their time teaching to the test. The school districts are bummed out because 80% of our schools have already cut back on history, on the arts, on music. And over time, in most school districts, young people will wind up learning less, not more, because of this law. So Hillary believes it would be better to spend the money to recognize that 2 million teachers are about to retire, and we should recruit, train, and deploy truly qualified new young teachers in these subject areas, have smaller classes in the early grades, give the schools some help for their special education funds because we never paid our fair share at the national level, and then do something that is what the Army would do, what any franchise would do if they have some franchise operations failing and others succeeding. Find 20 schools in America at the high school level, 20 middle schools and 20 elementary schools with representative student bodies that today are performing at international standards of excellence. Figure out what they're doing right and pay to help all of our schools do that in their areas. That's positive, it's exciting. This will be far better than No Child Left Behind. It's another reason you should vote for president. The last education point I want to make is this. Every year, thousands of young people are now dropping out of college because they think they simply cannot afford to borrow 10 or 20,000 more bucks. The cost of a college education in America has gone up 75%. The average size of student debt upon graduation has gone up more than 50%. But for a young person to drop out of college because they don't borrow $10,000 or $20,000, to all of you college students who are here, charitably, is nuts. Because a college degree is worth more than $1 million to the student who gets it, and therefore more than $1 million to the rest of us. But look what they're facing. These student loans, some of them are 12, 14, 16, 18%. So Hillary is the only person who's done anything about this. Late last year, she passed a bill called the Student Borrower's Bill of Rights, which essentially says, don't dare drop out. Because now, no matter how much you borrow and how little you earn when you get out of college, you have the absolute right to pay that loan back as a small fixed percentage of your income over a longer period of time. It benefits you for a lifetime. We should make a lifetime investment in you. She also believes the Pell Grant should be raised every year to keep up with inflation, that the tuition tax credit should be $3,500 a year, not $1,650, that the student loan companies abusive should be cracked down on, and that the government should offer these kids money at a reasonable low interest rate if you can't get it in the private sector. You are underwriting this anyway. Why are the taxpayers underwriting exorbitant interest rates? You know, when Hillary and I were in law school, we didn't have a nickel to our names. We were up to our ears in loans. I had 6 jobs in law school, never more than 3 at once. And I was so dumb I didn't think I was poor. I thought I was in great shape. But my government believed in its young people. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I came from the second poorest state in the country. My stepfather was a high school dropout. My government loaned me money at 3% interest. You know what that says to a kid? And believe me, even my mama didn't think I was going to be president. I was just another kid going to school. But do you know what it says to young people? It says, I believe in you. You're important to us. You got a role to play in our nation's future. Take this money. Get your education. We're not going to bankrupt you. Why don't we do that for our young people again? If you vote for her for president, that's exactly what she'll do. And she believes that if you get out of college and you become a public servant, so you know you're not going to get rich and you're doing something we badly need done. If you're a teacher, a nurse, a police officer, a fireman, a mental health worker, your service should repay the loan. Every year you serve, you knock some of the loan down. Finally, on the economics, you ought to vote for her because she was the first person to call for action on this home mortgage crisis more than a year before the administration did anything. And she has the only plan designed to stop this thing in its tracks. Look, most of these people are being foreclosed on are honest, hard-working people that sign these variable rate mortgages called subprime, right? They didn't know from nothing about the mortgage business. They asked themselves the same question I asked myself when I bought my first home on a $16,000 salary for $20,500. And my mortgage payment was $175 a month. I asked myself one question: can I make the mortgage payment? Isn't that right? We're all there, right? Okay, they could make it. So now they're coming back to him saying, I'm sorry, your mortgage, your interest payment is expired, the period, so now you got to pay interest and principal. Or they're coming back to him and saying, I'm sorry, the economy's in the tank, these loans are risky, so if you want to stay in the house, you got to pay a higher interest rate. Look, a lot of these people already have a mortgage bigger than the home value now, because homes have gone down $1.9 trillion in value. This is self-defeating if these people can stay in their homes, because every time somebody moves out of their house, it drives home values down more. It costs the economy a fortune. Hillary says, I will give the states some money, and I will have the federal government buy and renegotiate mortgages so that every one of these people who is honest, who didn't lie on their mortgage application, and who can make that monthly mortgage payment can stay in that house for the next 5 years at that mortgage payment till this crisis blows over. That is far cheaper than throwing another 1 million or 2 million people in the street and paying 10 or 20 times this to clean it up. Those are the kind of things you hire a president to do, to make aggressive decisions to keep everybody in the economic marketplace. She's the only person who believes this. But let me remind you, when her opponents, both of them, say this is not financially responsible, she's a senator from New York. She's got a great economic advisory team. They understand finance. They know these home people did not cause this mess. They know that speculators, a lot of them in New York, caused this mess. And there's no reason to blame the homeowners who can make their home payments. So that's another reason you ought to vote for her. So those are my 3 reasons. She's the best change maker, she'd be the best commander-in-chief, and she's way the best to turn this economy around. Last night, in my last rally, I did what I'm just about to do. I was going around here, shaking hands. So right here, I meet a young couple in tears who've already lost their home, working as hard as they can. Both of them, they said, you know, what do we know about home mortgages? We just knew we could make the monthly payment. Now we're on the street. They don't know if they'll ever have a home again. Then I get here. I meet a 53-year-old woman who's got multiple sclerosis, had it for 22 years. She got up to shake my hand and left her walker, and her husband's bracing her up. She said, I don't have any health care. I don't know how he does it. Then I met a woman in her 80s who reminded me why Hillary was in this race. She said, my son died on April the 22nd. And the very next day I had to go to the hospital. But I learned something from my son. He voted absentee for Hillary, and the day I got out of the hospital, I did too. She said, you got 2 from us. We want somebody on our side again in the White House. So, now, all these, let me just say one last thing. It'd be a shame to go to all this trouble to change the country and not win in November. She's the most electable candidate. And all these people who are saying she can't win, there are certain Clinton laws of politics. You've been so serious, let me tell you. Law number 1, if somebody tells you it's nothing personal, they're about to stick it to you. If somebody who tells you this is not a money problem, they are not talking about their own problem. Somebody tells you you can't win, it's because they know you can, and they're afraid you will. Now, they said she couldn't win after Iowa, and she was dead in New Hampshire, but she came back 16 points in 2 days and won anyway. Then they said she was going to get beat in California because all the famous people were against her, and she won by 10 points anyway because the real voters who needed a president were for her. Then they said she was going down in Massachusetts because both the senators and the governor were against her, and she won by 15 points because the people knew she was their candidate. Then she lost all those races in February because she was flat broke, and over 300,000 people like you who had never given money to a candidate before and never used the internet to do it went to HillaryClinton.com and gave her $30 million so she could go on. And still she was outspent by $4 million in Texas, 2-1 in Ohio, 3-1, $8 million on television in Pennsylvania, and she won big victories anyway. Because the people who need a president know she'd be the best. So if Indiana will say yes to her on Tuesday, she can be nominated, she can be elected, and America would be better for it. You will always be proud. She's the best candidate I've ever supported. I hope you'll make her the president. Thank you.